Hello, everybody. Welcome back to my channel, and thank you for joining me for another true crime video. I hope you are all having an amazing day. Now, for today's video, we will be discussing week 5 of the Karen Read trial, which has been the shortest week thus far with just a single day of testimonies. Now, week 5 did begin with the resumed cross-examination of Brian Higgins. However, I included this aspect in my last video to sort of keep his testimony in a single video. So in week 5, the niece and nephew of John O'Keefe both testified. We finally heard from a few experts, and we ended the day with a couple of Canton City workers. Now, I believe the niece and nephew will be the last of the civilian testimonies, at least from the prosecution's case in chief. And during their testimonies, the court barred media outlets from using their names or live streaming their testimony as they are minors, which I certainly agree this is the right move, but it is hard to interpret their testimonies since we're unable to see their demeanor and such. But overall, their testimonies seem to be quite similar. Both of them refer to Karen Read as the defendant, which I believe was a tactic by the prosecution. They both testified that the relationship between Karen Read and John O'Keefe was great at first and then went downhill, saying there was a lot of disagreements and arguments. However, neither Read nor O'Keefe had ever raised a hand at each other in anger. Now, the niece recalled the morning of January 29th when Karen Read woke her up at 4:30, informing her that John hadn't come home. She said she heard Karen Read on the phone calling people, and she remembered Karen mentioning that the two had had an argument the night before, further recalling that Karen was pacing down the hallway, asking what could have happened, asking what if I hit him, or maybe a snowplow hit him. After the children testified, we got into the testimonies of some experts. First, we heard from Dr. Justin Rice, the ER doctor. Dr. Rice testified that when John O'Keefe arrived at Good Samaritan Hospital, he was intubated, hypothermic, and in cardiac arrest. His internal temperature was just at 80 degrees, which is shockingly low. He discussed the injuries of John O'Keefe, which included abrasions or scratches on his right arm, injuries above his right eye and his nose, a head trauma, and his heart was not pumping on its own. During cross-examination, Dr. Rice submitted that John O'Keefe did not have any injuries from his neck down and not a single broken or fractured bone. An important question was raised when Dr. Rice said that there was no note in his medical report that says John O'Keefe was or could have been hit by a vehicle. In addition to John O'Keefe, Dr. Rice also confirmed that he treated Karen Read for a Section 12, which essentially is an involuntary detention of a person who may be a threat to themselves or other people. However, according to his testimony, Dr. Rice doesn't recall treating Karen Read, nor does he recall ordering her blood. Though his report showed Read's serum alcohol was 93 milligrams per deciliter. Next to testify was Gary Fowler, a pathologist at Good Samaritan Hospital. Dr. Fowler said Read's blood alcohol was drawn at 9:03 a.m. on January 29th and reiterated that Karen Read's blood alcohol was 93 milligrams per deciliter, but confirmed that the hospital does not collect blood alcohol levels for legal purposes, further explaining that this lab does not calculate or convert the results into blood alcohol content, such as we might be familiar with. After Dr. Fowler was excused, the prosecution called Nicholas Roberts, a field service engineer for the biotech Thermo Fisher. Roberts previously worked in the state police crime lab as a forensic scientist. Now, as someone who seems to be an expert in his field, Roberts testified that he was assigned to perform the conversion on Karen Read's blood test that was provided by Good Samaritan Hospital. The process is called a retrograde extraction, which allows scientists to calculate the possible blood alcohol content at a time prior to when the blood was drawn. However, the results of this process is reliant on when the blood was drawn and the time of the last alcoholic beverage. In this case, Nicholas Roberts performed the retrograde extraction, placing her last drink at 12:45 a.m., and with her blood being drawn at 9 a.m., he determined that Karen Read's blood alcohol level was between 0.135 and 0.292 at the time when she allegedly hit John O'Keefe with her vehicle. This would mean her levels would have been substantially higher than the legal limit of 0.08. However, upon listening to the cross examination, Attorney Little poked holes in this calculation as she asked Roberts, if Reed drank alcohol after the 12:45 time that he was given by law enforcement, your entire calculation would be inaccurate. To which Nicholas Roberts agreed.
You'd agree that the more imprecise an extrapolation is, the less reliable it is.
Yeah, you do have to base it on good. Your starting blocks have to be good. So you have to know the times in which the blood was drawn, the time of the incident, and essentially what your value was for your BAC.
And the time of the last drink, you'd want to know that?
So we would put that around the time, either the time of the last drink or the incident date.
And so the more sort of unknowns you're trying to account for, you'd agree the less reliable your end result is going to be.
It could be, yes.
And you'd agree that sort of the range you gave in this case, which was 0.135 to 0.292, that's a very, very large disparity.
Yeah.
Almost a sort of 120% swing.
Yeah.
It's a very large number. You'd agree with that?
Yeah, there's a large range, like I said, due to the factors involved in the calculation. That's how it gets so large.
And that's because you're acting with a lot of unknowns in this case.
Yes.
Now, you testified that your retrograde extrapolation assumes that Ms. Reed reached the elimination phase of processing alcohol at or before sort of 12:45 a.m.
Yeah, we allow for, we start for the maximum at the 12:45, and then it would have been 2:45 for the minimum.
And so for purposes of your calculation, if Ms. Reed drank alcohol after 12:45 a.m. and before her blood was drawn at 9:08 a.m., your entire calculation would be invalid.
Yeah.
Meaning, if there is a possibility that Karen Reed drank alcohol at 4 o'clock or 5 o'clock in the morning, that blood alcohol content level would have been completely inaccurate, meaning we don't truly know what her blood alcohol content level would have been at the time that John O'Keefe was allegedly hit. After Nicholas Roberts was excused, we heard from a few individuals who work for the town of Canton. First, we heard from Michael Trotta, who is Canton's superintendent of public works. During Trotta's testimony, he described the plow plan for Canton on January 28th and 29th. On cross-examination, Trotta said that Trooper Proctor reached out to him on February 3rd, 2022, and inquired about the Fairview route. Trotta said Brian Laughlin was the plow driver for Fairview during the time in question, and said he may have provided Brian Laughlin's name to Trooper Proctor, but he couldn't be certain. And this left us with the last witness of the week, Louis Jutras, who is Canton's manager of information systems. In short, he is responsible for the security systems, GPS, cell phones, and any other technology for the municipal department. He testified he had pulled some footage for investigators between the time periods of 12 and 1 a.m. and from between 5 and 6 a.m. on January 29th. So far, we only saw a few seconds from that footage where Jutras confirmed it was footage he provided to law enforcement. He also mentioned that the GPS for the public works trucks were not working during this time period, explaining this happens several times throughout the year for various reasons. During cross-examination, defense attorney Yannetti asked questions as to whether Jutras knew if there was any missing footage, to which he responded that he didn't watch the footage, he didn't delete any footage. However, he did explain that the cameras are motion activated. Yannetti further questions about how the footage auto-deletes after 30 days, and because the investigators never asked him to save the footage, the raw, original footage was no longer recoverable, insinuating that the investigators' footage could have been altered and there would be no way to suggest otherwise.
You would agree with me that as the IT director, you have the ability, if you wanted to download the footage onto some hard drive to preserve it, if you wanted to do that?
Yes.
Did any state trooper ever ask you to download and preserve that footage so that it would exist longer than that 30 to 60 day period?
No.
And so it's fair to say you did not do that, correct?
Correct.
You complied with what they asked you to do.
Yes.
Do you recall Michael Proctor asking you to provide to the defense in this case the same raw footage you had previously provided to the state police?
No.
And you don't recall telling him that you couldn't do that because after 30 to 60 days, the footage is gone, correct?
I had a phone call with what I thought was Trooper Dunn asking for another copy of the data and telling him that I did not have it and I couldn't recreate it.
It's fair to say that once you shared the footage with the state police in February of 2022, you didn't control what they did with it after that, correct?
Correct.
And you have no personal knowledge about how they preserved it or didn't preserve it, correct?
I'll allow it. Do you have any idea?
No.
Now, with these witnesses, from what I gathered, these testimonies just laid some foundation to some important witnesses, as we assume we'll hear from Trooper Proctor if the prosecution calls him. If not, I imagine the defense will, and Trooper Dunn. Are we going to see Karen Reed's broken taillight on this footage, or is there going to be some missing footage that might have exonerated her? It's going to be interesting to see how this plays out, but that's all I've got for week 5. Let me know what you think so far. What are your thoughts about what the kids had to say about Karen Reed and the dynamics of their relationship? Do you think we'll see footage that can prove the guilt of Karen Reed? I want to hear all of your thoughts and theories down below. Make sure you like this video before you go, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye.